As Pope Leo XIV, I settled into the Apostolic Palace, and right away I made a rather unexpected request to visit the Vatican Apostolic Archive. Not the press room or the papal apartments, but the archives. My staff seemed taken aback. No pope had ever shown such urgency to dive into the depths of those archives so soon. But I wasn't your typical pope. Before my election, I was Cardinal Robert Francis Prevost, quietly serving in Peru, and then in Rome as the prefect for bishops. When my election was announced, it sent shockwaves across the world, not just because I was born in America, but also due to the name I chose, Leo. I was the first pope in over 100 years to take that name. When reporters pressed for my reasoning, I simply stated that my mission was not yet finished, leaving many puzzled. The archives were eerily cold and quiet, nestled beneath the Apostolic Palace, filled with long, dimly lit corridors, draped in dust and history. I was accompanied by Father Diego Amato, a young Jesuit archivist who had recently been assigned to this section focusing on documents from the 19th and early 20th centuries. I needed to find something. Leo XIII's personal writings, anything sentimental he'd left behind. Together we rummaged through shelves stacked with ancient files, some yellowing from age. Then, Father Diego uncovered a black envelope, unremarkable without any wax seal or crest. Inside, a single line written in old ink. "To the next Leo, when the time is right." What lay within was intriguing. A small bronze medallion showing Saint Michael the Archangel, sword raised, wings unfurled. The back bore one word, hand-carved, "Adore." Alongside it was a folded piece of parchment, fragile yet well preserved. I read it slowly to myself. "To my successor of the same name, if heaven allows there to be one." After my vision in 1884, I spoke of Satan's request to test the church, but I never revealed what came next. I saw a flame hovering over an altar beneath the open sky. It did not burn, it glowed. And I heard a voice say, "When another Leo sits upon Peter's chair, the fire will return, and he must choose silence or glory." I saw him kneel. I saw the sky part. This was not a metaphor or a dream. It was a warning. He will find the place under the archangel's gaze, near a fountain where no flowers grow. There, heaven will speak again. I carefully folded the parchment. "I've passed by that spot before," I mentioned, reflecting. Father Diego looked intrigued. "Do you think it's real?" he asked. "I believe he saw something," I replied, "and I think I was meant to read this." That evening, I felt a stirring within me, a sense of purpose igniting at the thought of what lay ahead. Strolling through the tranquil Vatican gardens, the Pope found solace in solitude, free from the usual crowds and cameras. He approached a well-known spot where a striking bronze statue of Saint Michael stood valiantly, sword driven into the serpent, captured mid-combat. Nearby, a weathered stone fountain gurgled softly, showing signs of age with cracked surfaces and uneven stones. The surroundings were bare. No vibrant flowers blossomed, only patches of dry soil and drooping olive branches. Kneeling before the statue, he remained silent, not seeking answers, but simply waiting. Minutes passed, reflecting the stillness around him, when surprisingly, he felt a stir deep within. It wasn't a voice that spoke, but rather a profound sense of presence, imparting a single, commanding thought: prepare the altar. Opening his eyes, he sensed that something intangible had shifted in the air. In that sacred moment, Pope Leo XIV grasped the significance of a letter sent to him by his predecessor, Leo XIII, a message meant for future generations that had transformed into something personal and immediate. Later, within the privacy of his chapel, he gently placed a medallion on the altar's edge and recorded one poignant line in his personal journal: "He is near, and he wants to be known again." Since discovering the letter, he chose not to discuss its contents, not out of secrecy, but because the profound silence felt more appropriate than words. His daily visits to the garden became a ritual. He returned alone, without an entourage or public statements, finding comfort in the presence of Saint Michael and the old cracked fountain beside him. Sometimes he knelt for just a few moments. Other times he lingered longer, each time enveloped in quiet anticipation, sensing a holy watchfulness that felt as steady as time itself. Meanwhile, Father Diego Amato delved deeper into a mystery of his own. He meticulously sifted through gardening reports, maintenance logs, and ancient Vatican maps until he stumbled upon something alarming. Over the past century, efforts to restore the flower bed by the fountain had repeatedly failed. Despite consistent attempts, importing roses from Florence, enriching the soil, and even adjusting the irrigation, nothing thrived. One detail struck him particularly. A handwritten note from a groundskeeper in the early 20th century stated simply, "Soil won't hold. Roots die in a week. Area ordered left alone by papal request. Possibly sacred." The note's date coincided perfectly with the final weeks of Leo XIII's life. Sharing this discovery with Pope Leo XIV met with a quiet response. The Pope simply nodded, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. "He was keeping something for me," he said softly. The very next day, he communicated a decision, not to the public, but to a single trustful confidant. In the heart of the Vatican, a unique vision took shape. Pope Leo XIV envisioned a simple altar that would stand apart from the grandeur usually associated with papal spaces. "Stone only outdoors," he instructed, avoiding any opulence or intricate designs. No decorations, no inscriptions. He wanted it unadorned, precisely reflecting his wish for a more profound connection. A trusted group of stonemasons, hand-picked for their discretion, took on this task. They approached it with reverence, ensuring they disrupted as little as possible. As they worked, they carefully cleared just the surface, avoiding unnecessary alterations to the land. Each session was conducted with a slowness that felt almost meditative, relying solely on natural light. Then, something remarkable happened beneath the layer of soil they were tending to. Just beneath the surface lay a slab of white marble, unnumbered and pristine, perfectly preserved, right where the Pope had been kneeling for days. The stonemasons paused, filled with a mix of surprise and respect, and swiftly reported their discovery. When Pope Leo arrived at the site, silence enveloped the moment. He stared at the marble for what felt like an eternity before gently placing his hand on it, feeling its warmth radiate through his palm. With great care, they built the altar around this hidden treasure, not obscuring it, but allowing it to remain visible, an ancient foundation beneath their work. Later, returning to the altar alongside Father Diego, the Pope knelt before it once more. he placed a bronze medallion inscribed with "Adore" on the cool surface and whispered, "It is prepared." In that moment, the connection between the past and present felt palpable. That very night, something extraordinary unfolded in the chapel. A votive candle flickered beside the crucifix. Its flame shone brighter than usual, then dimmed before flaring up again. One nun, attending to her duties, marveled at the candle's behavior, likening it to a heartbeat. Though she kept her thoughts to herself, she penned in her journal, "I think he's coming." Rumors about the newly constructed altar drifted among a select few. Among those who caught wind were 2 bishops and a rector from a Roman seminary. Each of them had recently felt an inexplicable clarity wash over them during prayer. One bishop broke down in tears during adoration, while another heard an enigmatic voice calling him. The rector, who felt an important presence during Mass, began celebrating in complete silence after communion. Invited by Father Diego, this small group gathered in a circular room beneath the Vatican Library, a space once used for studying scriptures. There were 5 of them in total. Their meeting was brief, filled with an intensified sense of purpose, culminating in an hour of prayer. When their time of reflection came to a close, Father Diego rose and stated simply, "There's nothing to lead. We are not organizers. We are kneelers." In those quiet words, the essence of their gathering resonated deeply. Heaven, it seems, desires reverence rather than noise. This sentiment resonated with our group, though we chose to remain nameless. Yet, in Father Diego's heart, one phrase lingered: "Guardians of the altar." As dusk settled in, Pope Leo knelt once more at the altar he had quietly erected in the garden. It had been built stone by stone, blessed not through ceremony but by the solemnity of his dedication. The sun dipped below the trees, and as he closed his eyes, he sensed a profound silence enveloping him. There were no signs, no booming revelations, just a gentle wind and a singular thought that coursed through him, striking him with an unexpected intensity. "You knelt. I will answer." In that moment, something changed. It wasn't loud or overt, but an invisible shift hung in the air, an electric tension reminiscent of the stillness before a storm. Each person who wandered near the newly established altar felt it, though they couldn't quite name it. This altar, constructed under the Pope's quiet guidance, bore no markings or candles. It was simply an unadorned slab of cold stone resting atop a marble that had long slumbered beneath the soil, untouched for over a century. Yet somehow it felt alive. The first to notice was a Swiss guard stationed near the St. Michael statue. He was going about his usual patrol when a flicker caught his attention, a shimmering aura rising from the stone like heat dancing in the cool air. Just as quickly as it appeared, it vanished, leaving him bewildered. Later, in his shift report, he noted, "Saw faint glow above new altar. Air felt heavier. No explanation, no heat source." He kept this to himself, but soon others began to sense the strangeness too. An aged Vatican gardener, familiar with the grounds for decades, witnessed something even more peculiar. While clearing fallen leaves near the altar, he noticed the soil around it, soft and dark, starkly different from the lifeless dust that had resisted plant life for years. "Something changed in the dirt," he confided to a colleague. No seeds had been sown, yet life began to emerge from the seemingly barren ground. Each evening, just after sunset, Pope Leo would return to the altar, Sometimes he would kneel in prayer, and other times he stood with his head bowed thoughtfully. Once he pressed both hands against the stone, softly murmuring just one word, "Ready." He never sought signs. Instead, he embraced the stillness, simply waiting. Within the circle that formed around the Pope, a group began to take shape, what some started to call the guardians of the altar. Father Diego, who had first unearthed Leo XIII's letter, began gathering like-minded clergy. They too felt that stirring within them, a call back to silence, to deep adoration, and to the raw reverence that had all but faded. There's a remarkable story that unfolded in Rome, a story that starts with a seminarian from Argentina. For 3 consecutive nights, he woke from his dreams haunted by a singular word that echoed in his mind: Adora. It was a mysterious calling that seemed to resonate deeply, something he couldn't quite shake off. At the same time, a retired bishop from Austria found himself in Rome, focused on some business, but interestingly enough, drawn to prayer in front of the altar. As he knelt there, tears streamed down his face, though he couldn't pinpoint exactly why. It felt as if he wasn't alone, as if someone was waiting for him. That sense of presence lingered. Then there was the moment that nobody anticipated. During a quiet morning mass, the Pope entered the chapel for some reflection. As he prayed in silence, he noticed something peculiar. The bronze thurible, a decorative censer that had gone unused for years, began to sway gently. There was no draft, no movement in the air, nothing to stir it. Yet it swung back and forth delicately, almost as if an invisible hand guided it. The Pope, without calling for help, bowed his head and softly whispered, "He's already here." News of this extraordinary event began to spread quietly, almost like a secret. There were no grand announcements or public statements from the Vatican. Instead, information slipped through the cracks: whispers, distant pictures, and a blog post shared by a theology student who had heard about it from a friend within the Curia. Little by little, the phrase, "the altar is waking," gained traction among devoted Catholics online. Pope Leo XIV had the sense that something monumental was on the horizon. This wasn't about gaining fame, it was about making a critical choice. Back in 1884, Leo XIII had received a warning filled with shadows. However, this time felt different. Rather than a foreboding of loss, it was a divine nudge to restore what was once pure. "The fire will return," Leo XIII had written, leaving behind a vital decision for Leo XIV. Silence or glory. Understanding the gravity of the situation, Leo XIV realized this was not a quest for personal glory. It was about Eucharistic glory. For him, silence wasn't a sign of weakness. It represented the very space where God's voice echoed the loudest. That evening he returned to the altar, bringing with him something sacred, a small white linen cloth. With trembling hands he carefully laid it across the stone, then placed a bronze medallion on top, one that had been passed down from Leo XIII, simply inscribed with the word, "Adore." He knelt there, enveloped in silence, and in that serene moment he heard the call again, not a mere thought or feeling, but a clear message deep within. "I never left the altar, but you did. Now I am calling you home." Strangely enough, this altar bore no name, no plaque, or a candle. Yet within just a few days, it transformed into something profoundly significant, a beacon that drew many back to faith. In the heart of Rome lies a place that's considered incredibly sacred, not because of established rituals or directives, but due to a palpable presence. Something profound had returned, and those who felt its draw knew it instinctively, even if they couldn't articulate it. Pope Leo XIV didn't publicly address this mystery. There were no grand proclamations or formal documents. Instead, he chose to act discreetly and with purpose. He gathered bishops, but not in a grand assembly, just pairs, in the shadows of the Vatican's corridors, away from the press. Each time he posed a simple yet weighty question. Do you still believe he is genuinely present on the altar? Responses varied. Some bishops answered quickly with a firm yes, while others hesitated or shed tears. Each one received an envelope from the Pope containing just a single word: adore. Meanwhile, a small group began to grow around Father Diego Amato. It consisted of 15 clergy and lay people from both young and old backgrounds who convened quietly in concealed spaces after sunset. Their meetings were devoid of books or discussions. They prayed in silence, simply lingering in the waiting. Each of them had felt a unique call. One nun found she couldn't voice any prayers during Mass, not out of fear, but as if speaking would disrupt something far greater. Another deacon awoke nightly at 3, feeling an irresistible urge to kneel in prayer, even without understanding the reason. And a priest experienced a compelling intuition during adoration. Prepare for something that only silence can embrace. They began to refer to their gathering spot as the place. Then the first sign of something bigger began to surface. A French bishop, passing through Rome on administrative duties, requested to stroll through the gardens. Unbeknownst to him, he had no clue about the altar's existence. Yet, as he walked past the statue of St. Michael, he felt a weight in his chest. Upon seeing the altar that had no markings, he fell to his knees. His secretary hurried over to assist him, but he graciously waved her away. He knelt there in silence for several minutes, finally whispering, "He's here. I don't know why, but he's here." That very evening, Pope Leo XIV found himself alone in his private chapel, his gaze fixated on the crucifix before shifting to the tabernacle. He spoke softly, a sentiment not captured in any written text. "They forgot you." Yet, he acknowledged, "But you have not forgotten them, and now you've returned for your altar." The following day, the Pope issued a concise directive to a select group of bishops across the globe. In just 7 days during Mass, they were instructed to pause for 1 minute following the consecration. There were no words or gestures allowed, just silence, no explanations or theological justifications, merely a command. He signed it with his papal name and illustrated a door below, symbolizing a new beginning. In this moment, the Custode Alaris quietly emerged, though never formally recognized or organized. Whispers started circulating, hinting that something profound was taking shape. It wasn't about a new council, nor a movement or uprising. This was a return not to guidelines or protocols, but to something much deeper, the presence. The first clear sign appeared, not in the heart of Rome, but within a humble parish nestled in rural Poland. During a typical evening Mass, as the priest elevated the Eucharist, a few parishioners noticed something peculiar, a subtle golden shimmer enveloping the host. It wasn't blinding, rather it flickered gently, reminiscent of a soft flame. One elderly parishioner captured the moment perfectly, saying it felt like heaven was gently reminding them of its reality. The priest, deeply affected and shaken, later confessed that he had struggled with doubts about the true presence for years. That very night, he spent over 2 hours lying prostrate before the tabernacle, grappling with his faith. Meanwhile, in Rome, Pope Leo XIV found himself returning to the altar, this time under the veil of night, when the gardens lay silent and deserted. He approached the altar, placing both hands on the stone where the medallion remained, and slowly pressed his lips to the surface, not out of routine but as an act of sincere repentance. In that instant, something transcendent shifted. It was a change that couldn't be seen or heard, yet it was unmistakable. Later, the Pope poured his heart out in his private journal. He described it as touching something vast and infinite, not fire, not wind, but an understanding, a recognition. It felt as if the altar welcomed him back. Suddenly, the weight of Leo XIV's warning became clear. The flame he spoke of, the choice between silence and glory, it was the silence that held true glory. Throughout time, silence was where God had always communicated. Rising from the altar, the Pope cradled the medallion close to his heart, silently proclaiming with every fiber of his being, "Come, Lord, your altar is waiting." It all began simply, just air, still and undisturbed. Pope Leo XIV stood alone in the gardens of the Vatican, confronted by an altar no one had requested, situated on ancient ground long forgotten, adorned by stone left untouched. He approached without the usual pomp. No vestments, no homily, not even a camera to bear witness. The only object on the altar was a bronze medallion passed down from Leo XIII, emblazoned with a single word, "Adore." Then, without any cinematic flair or explosive light, magic unfolded, not before the eyes, but deep within the soul. Something entered that garden, akin to sunlight breaking through a darkened room, not with haste, but with a serene gentleness, like the release of a long-held breath. Before he could see or understand fully, Pope Leo felt the presence before it manifested, a warmth in his spine, a heaviness on his heart, and a stillness so deep it resonated like the rumble of a distant storm. Instinctively, he dropped to his knees and then, laying face down against the stone, he surrendered not from fear, but from the realization that in the presence of God, this was the only posture that resonated with truth. In the stillness of the apostolic palace, something unusual began to unfold. A guard standing by the window caught a whiff of incense, though he couldn't understand why. No incense was lit, and there wasn't a wisp of smoke in sight. Yet it felt as though an unseen presence was shifting the air, almost like a sacred chant flowing through the stone walls. In the chapel, a nun tending to the candles suddenly froze. All the flames on the altar danced in unison, reaching higher for a brief 3 seconds before settling back down. Overcome with emotion, she fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face, words lost in the moment. As this sensation rippled through the city, others were moved as well. A Mother Superior at a Carmelite monastery outside Lisbon was leading night prayers when she felt compelled to whisper, "He's moving." Meanwhile, a seminarian in Argentina, who had never ventured beyond his small village, awoke from a profound slumber and knelt in the dark, murmuring, "Something is returning." In southern Italy, during a moment of adoration, a priest abruptly halted mid-blessing, a profound silence enveloping him. Later he confided in his bishop, sharing a remarkable experience. I felt as if the host was watching me. Back in Rome, Pope Leo XIV remained prostrate at the altar, his forehead pressed against the cool stone. Then, for only the second time since becoming pope, a clear message resonated within him, not a booming voice, but a gentle, undeniable call. "You called, I came." Hesitantly, he lifted his head just enough to breathe, feeling tears from his distress soaking into the altar's linen cloth. In a whisper barely audible, he inquired, "What do you want?" The response was neither dramatic nor elusive, but was crystal clear. "My altar again, my place again, untouched, unhurried, and entirely mine." In that moment, a gentle breeze swept through the garden, an isolated pocket of tranquility amid the bustling city. The trees intertwined their branches as if leaning closer, while the fountain's water rippled outward in a perfect circle before settling back into calmness. A dove perched on the statue of Saint Michael, unflinching. As Pope Leo moved to kneel, he returned the medallion to the altar, and for the first time since his election, he raised his voice in the presence of the unseen light. "Not one more day without you, not one more altar without reverence. Your silence has been neglected, but now it shall find its voice." That same night, with urgency in his heart, he penned a letter, not to cardinals or governments, but directed towards the priests. Just a single page, it conveyed a powerful message. "He is returning. Prepare your altar. Prepare your people. Silence the noise. Restore the reverence. The fire has come to Rome, and it is real." I'll never forget the impact of that letter. It wasn't signed with anything grand, just a kneeling servant. But it took on a life of its own, quietly spreading as priests shared it by hand. While some brushed it off, many others felt its weight long before they even laid eyes on the words. In Ireland, there was this small chapel where a priest who had spent years in doubt finally found himself before the tabernacle. He began to tremble, and before he knew it, he was on his knees, sobbing silently for 10 full minutes. Finally, he whispered out, "He came." It was a profound moment, packed with emotion that echoed what many were starting to feel. Meanwhile, in Poland, a bishop took a dramatic step in the still of the night. He locked the cathedral doors and went to the altar, laying face down in the darkness. It's curious. He never really talked about what happened there, but something about him shifted after that night. Back at the Vatican, Pope Leo XIV stood at the altar in the gardens the very next morning. It was a moment of offering for him, not a plea. As he lifted his hands towards heaven, the wind swept through that sacred space once again. With his eyes closed, he heard a clear message. "You prepared the altar. Now I will prepare my church." It started out as a gentle whisper, then blossomed into undeniable moments of power. Silence began to weave its way through the church, not a void, but a palpable presence. The Pope's private letter had quietly made its way into the hands of hundreds of priests across the globe. They were mostly humble, faithful individuals. Some dismissed it outright, while others felt their hearts race. In a parish just outside Seville, one priest arrived at his church an hour before dawn. He stripped away everything that distracted. No electric guitar, no flashy screens, and none of the usual announcements plastered on the sanctuary walls. Instead, he laid a simple white linen cloth on the altar and lit 2 candles. As the Mass began, He spoke only the necessary words, no embellishments or unnecessary chatter. At the moment of consecration, something remarkable took place. An unusual stillness filled the room, one that felt like it had been waiting for someone to notice. Parishioners found themselves weeping, tears flowing without them quite understanding why. In Argentina, another young priest printed out that letter from the Pope and taped it inside his sacristy. With renewed inspiration, he turned to face the altar during Mass, keeping the focus not on the congregation, but on the sacred. No declarations, just a simple pivot towards the presence he felt. Remarkably, by the end of the week, confessions had doubled. As for Pope Leo XIV, he kept his thoughts to himself, avoiding St. Peter's Basilica for days. Each evening was spent in the gardens at the altar, sometimes in solitude, other times alongside Father Diego and a few others, all of them just bringing kneelers and a shared sense of reverence. One evening, as the sun began to dip beneath the horizon, a group of seminarians approached him, eager and curious. As I walked alongside Pope Leo XIV toward the altar, a profound silence enveloped us. No buzzing phones or cameras, just an air of reverence. Once we reached the stone altar, the Pope turned to face us. Don't anticipate flames or ostentatious signs. Simply expect him, he advised. Kneeling down, he was the first to humble himself before that sacred space, and one by one, we followed suit. For 35 long minutes, we remained still, allowing the moment to wash over us. No music, no sound, just the soothing presence of birds near the fountain and a gentle wind that brushed past, almost like it had a mind of its own. In that sacred stillness, every seminarian bowed their heads. When we finally broke the silence, one of us remarked softly, "It felt like he was breathing through us." Meanwhile, across the globe, the Church was undergoing subtle transformations that were quietly significant. In Kenya, a spontaneous midnight Eucharistic adoration service attracted almost 2,000 attendees without any prior announcement. In Canada, a priest who had battled with his faith for years felt an unexplainable urge during a Mass service. He paused mid-sermon to kneel before the tabernacle, remaining there for a staggering 20 minutes. Over in the Philippines, a teenage boy fell to the floor of a cathedral, uttering, "I saw him looking at me," prompting the doors to remain open throughout the night. Then, something unexpected occurred in Vatican City. Without any press release or explanation, the deep, resonant bells of St. Peter's Basilica began to ring at 3:00 p.m., the hour of mercy. There was no scheduled event or crowd to witness it, just the bells tolling slowly and sonorously, echoing through Rome. Tourists paused mid-step, and locals turned toward the sound as if drawn by an unseen force. From the Apostolic Palace, I could see Pope Leo XIV observing the scene, shivering with the realization that he was shaking the Church, not to dismantle it, but rather to awaken it. That evening, the Pope wrote a new directive, distilling his thoughts into a single line. With no envelope attached, he sent it via personal email to over 10,000 parishes. During your next Mass, after the consecration, kneel in complete silence for 60 seconds. Do not speak, do not move, do not be afraid. The reactions varied. Some priests disregarded his instruction while others embraced it. Where silence was honored, a remarkable pattern emerged, a sense of stillness, a tangible weight, as if a profound presence had materialized, something real, rather than simply emotional. One anonymous priest from Nigeria expressed, "The silence hit me like thunder. I couldn't lift my head." Reflecting on the experience back in the garden, Pope Leo knelt at the altar once more, not with a request, but with a question lingering in his heart. What comes next? Almost immediately the answer revealed itself. First, silence, and then fire. He remembered being cautioned about the nature of fire. It doesn't always arrive with heat, nor does it always annihilate. Sometimes, fire simply illuminates what was previously hidden. The following morning, Pope Leo XIV celebrated a private mass in the small chapel next to his residence. Only 5 people were present: 2 sisters, Father Diego, and a couple of Vatican workers who had quietly dedicated decades to their service. The Mass was different that day. He took his time, each movement deliberate as he followed the liturgy without adding a single word or altering a phrase. It felt as if he was allowing the ancient ritual to breathe life into the world once again. During the moment of consecration, he lingered with the host, holding it longer than expected. The atmosphere thickened. It was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Then, in an instant, every candle in the chapel flared brighter, startling one of the nuns into an audible gasp. But just as quickly, silence enveloped them again. With a gentle touch, Pope Leo placed the host back on the patent, avoiding eye contact as he whispered, "He is here." Meanwhile, far from the chapel, something extraordinary was unfolding. In Naples, a priest, having just read the Pope's letter aloud before Mass, found himself stopped mid-homily. His gaze was locked on the crucifix, and he later recounted to his bishop that he had seen Christ's eyes on the cross open. In Brazil, a laywoman captured something unusual during Eucharistic adoration. Her video was dark and grainy, yet thousands witnessed a strange flicker of light cross the tabernacle. No tricks, no reflections, just an otherworldly moment. The video, aptly named "He Moved," disappeared within hours, but not before it reached countless viewers. Back inside the Vatican, a group known as the Custodes Altaris, whose names were still secret, were experiencing similar phenomena. A bishop from the Congo, a Canadian cardinal, and a Franciscan hermit from Assisi gathered, not in whispered conversations, but in shared silence. Whenever they met, the atmosphere shifted, knees buckled, voices faltered, and tears flowed freely, many of which had been held back for years. Pope Leo XIV stopped requesting reports about these events. Instead, he simply encouraged everyone to witness what would happen if reverence returned. 3 remarkable occurrences followed, each distinct yet inexplicably connected. First, in a small chapel in northern France, the tabernacle door was discovered unlatched one morning, untouched by human hands. Though the host remained inside, 2 onlookers reported that the chapel smelled of roses upon entering. Next, outside Manila, a priest carrying the Blessed Sacrament during a modest street adoration suddenly halted. He felt the monstrance grow warm, so he passed it to the deacon beside him, who confirmed the sensation. It was burning hot. Finally, back in Rome, as he spent a peaceful moment in the garden, a blackbird landed on the altar, a simple yet profound sign amidst all that was unfolding. It was a quiet morning when I found myself reflecting on something extraordinary that happened in the Vatican gardens. For 3 consecutive days, strange occurrences had captured my attention. Father Diego, who had been observing from the trees, remarked aloud about it, and I could only respond, "He is marking it." It dawned on me that the fire would not target governments or institutions as one might expect. Instead, it would first reach the altars, specifically those altars that had forgotten who awaits there. That realization struck me deeply. That very night, I penned a brief letter, shorter than my previous ones. In it, I wrote, "He is moving not to punish, but to reclaim. The altar will be the first to burn, not in wrath, but in truth. Prepare your sanctuary, for what he touches, he purifies." The following day, an unexpected event unfolded in India. A bishop, right in the middle of the Mass, suddenly collapsed to his knees after the consecration. With a shaky voice, he whispered into the microphone before fainting, "He is standing at the altar." It was a moment heavy with silence, and in that silence, the presence revealed itself. That altar in the gardens had never spoken in the way people anticipated. There weren't any dramatic signs like thunder or earthquakes. But on that particular morning, something had undeniably shifted. Anyone who approached that altar could feel the change, a powerful yet gentle force. It all began just after sunrise. One of the gardeners, a man who had tended to those paths for over 2 decades, was clearing away fallen branches near the statue of St. Michael. As he got closer to the altar, he was struck not by what he saw, but by a faint sound, soft and gentle, almost like breathing through stone. He paused, dropped his rake, and stepped closer. The sound persisted, steady and low, like a distant hum, perfectly rhythmic. Overwhelmed, he slowly backed away, crossed himself, and left in silence. Later, he confided in a chaplain, asking, "Can an altar pray?" I felt it too. That evening I returned to the altar, this time alone. There were no guards, no Father Diego, no secretaries, just me and the lingering presence. I knelt before the stone, my knees weakened and my breath steadied. Suddenly I felt it again, a vibration in the air, a resonance deep within me, like a heartbeat that wasn't my own. Falling to my knees, I placed my hands on the cool marble surface and whispered, "Is this you?" In response, I sensed a weight, an intense pressure, not on my body, but on my very spirit. I remained there, in communion, for nearly an hour. There were no visions, no apparitions, just one unmistakable message formed quietly in that sacred silence. My church will know me again through my presence. In a small town in Croatia, something extraordinary unfolded one morning. During the Mass, at the precise moment of consecration, a thin crack appeared, slicing right through the altar from front to back. It was a haunting sound echoed on the stone floor, resonating through the church. The priest could hardly bear the weight of it, collapsing to his knees, feeling overwhelmed, as if the very altar could no longer sustain him. That same day, astonishing reports came in from around the globe. In Peru, a statue of Christ positioned behind a parish altar inexplicably began to weep, but instead of tears, it was oil that flowed. Meanwhile, across the ocean in the United States, strange occurrences persisted. In a chapel, the tabernacle light flickered out 3 times during adoration, only to reignite on its own each time. A priest in the Netherlands shared his bewilderment, describing how his hands felt as if they were weighed down, making it nearly impossible to lift the chalice during the elevation. In Cameroon, a frantic young girl rushed into a church amidst benediction, declaring, "He's standing on the altar," before fainting, her words a mix of shock and revelation. Then, there were the 3 seminarians in Poland, isolated in a chapel, who reported hearing Latin chanting during their silent prayer, despite none of them having any knowledge of the language. Back in the heart of the Vatican, Pope Leo XIV chose not to make any official statements. Instead, he quietly began crafting a new document that was anything but ordinary. It wasn't an encyclical, but rather a declaration that began with profound clarity. The altar is not empty. This declaration, meticulously handwritten, was distributed to over 100 bishops worldwide through personal couriers rather than broadcast online. His message contained a powerful conclusion. God is speaking again, not through prophecy, but through presence, through the altar, through the silence we abandoned. Let every priest return to the place where heaven still descends, not to talk, not to perform, but to tremble. As evening fell, whispers filled the Vatican. The Pope had chosen to retreat. No public appearances, no speeches, just 3 days of solitude in the garden, close to the altar. That night, as he lay before the stone, he felt a profound sense of understanding, as if a message was conveyed without words. I waited for my altar. Now my altar waits for my people. This revelation shifted something within him. From that moment on, he ceased to refer to my church, instead embracing the phrase his church in every correspondence, every note, every instruction. The following morning was shrouded in stillness. No bells rang, no audience gathered, just the mist clinging to the olive trees in the Vatican gardens, reminiscent of incense, refusing to lift. Pope Leo XIV surrendered to his second day of retreat, with only one person allowed near the altar, Father Diego Amato, a trusted assistant who visited solely to deliver bread. Something extraordinary unfolded on a seemingly ordinary morning. Father Diego, carrying a covered tray, sensed a strange warmth before he even reached the altar. It was like standing too close to a flickering flame, a heat that shouldn't have been there. He halted mid-step, lifting his gaze, and there it was, a small, white golden flame suspended just above the medallion on the unmarked stone. No wick, no fuel, and no wind to explain its existence. Awestruck, Father Diego lost himself in the moment. The tray slipped from his hands as he sank to his knees, his fingers quivering. In a breathless whisper, he let out, "You came." But the flame was not alone. Pope Leo XIV had been there long before him, enveloped in a profound silence, kneeling for over an hour when the flame first appeared. This wasn't a fierce blaze. It didn't roar or flicker wildly. It was simply itself, pure and serene, neither judgmental nor demanding, yet asking for everything. Slowly, the Pope rose to his feet. He didn't call out or seek help. Instead, he walked barefoot toward the altar, drawn to the flame. It felt like time stood still as he gazed, locked in a silent exchange. The flame remained still, patiently alive, waiting. Without a second thought, Pope Leo XIV extended his hand, not to quench or test, but to connect. His fingers met the flame as if it were a gentle pool of water mingling with fire. There was no pain, no burn, just an overwhelming rush of connection. In that moment, something deeper resonated within him, a weight that transcended the physical. It settled into his chest and echoed through his very soul. Memories flooded his mind. A doubtful priest standing at an altar, a chalice lifted in lack of reverence, a child whispering in an empty church, "Are you still here?" A forgotten tabernacle door and countless liturgies performed without any expectation of divine presence. As realization washed over him, the Pope staggered back, not out of fear, but from profound understanding. He murmured softly, "We left you behind, and you still waited." The flame pulsed gently in response, as if it acknowledged his truth. Later that evening, Father Diego returned to the garden only when summoned by the Pope. The tray of untouched food lay abandoned on the ground. Though the flame had vanished, a lingering warmth still emanated from the altar. There, at the center of the stone slab, was a mark, a burn that wasn't scorched or blackened, but a clean, round imprint as if a sacred host had been touched by fire. It wasn't crafted by hands, it just existed, unyielding and undeniable. That night the Pope put pen to paper in his journal, reflecting on the encounter. "The flame touched only one," he wrote. It was enough. He held the experience close, never sharing the details with anyone. But from that moment on, something had changed within him forever. A profound shift had begun, one that didn't rely on loud announcements, but rather unfolded in a hushed understanding. News spread quickly through the hidden circles of clergy, priests and bishops who had been observing from a distance, quietly recognizing something monumental. Some brushed it off, thinking it was mere gossip, yet those attuned to the change grasped its significance. They began to reaffirm teachings that had nearly faded. The altar isn't just a surface. The host isn't merely a symbol, and God isn't just a guest. He patiently awaits our recognition. Then something remarkable happened. Pilgrims appeared, not in droves, but as solitary seekers. Under the veil of night, they knelt amid the gardens and shared whispers. "We've heard the news. Is he still here?" The response echoed back. He never departed. The altar remained unnamed, but its significance was known far and wide. There were no grand announcements or official proclamations, no Vatican statements declaring miracles or sightings. Yet something undeniably transformative had taken place. It wasn't merely about documents or official decrees. The bedrock of this change lay in the humble act of kneeling. Knees that had long since forgotten their reverence began to bend once more, trembling in front of a presence that many thought had quieted. For several days, Pope Leo XIV remained away from the public eye, taking solace in the gardens. He didn't seek more signs or demand visions. He had witnessed enough to understand what the Church needed. Now was not a new message, but a rekindling of memory. The memory of the altar's true essence and the presence that had never truly left. Across chapels worldwide, this change began to take root not as a revival, but as a gentle remembrance. Priests started to genuflect once again, slowly and meaningfully. Adoration chapels brimmed with a stillness that spoke volumes. Masses were celebrated in silence after communion, as though spoken words would distract from the divine presence lingering in the hearts of the faithful. And surprisingly enough, it was the children who first recognized this shift. A 6-year-old girl in Croatia leaned close to her mother during Mass, exclaiming, "Jesus is awake again." Meanwhile, a boy in Colombia observed the tranquility and remarked to his priest, "Why is it so quiet? It's beautiful." In South Korea, a girl receiving her first communion was overwhelmed with emotion before even touching the host, later confiding to her catechist, I felt him looking at me. The media found itself bewildered. There were no flashy headlines or miraculous stories to chase, just an invisible current flowing gently through the global church, one kneeling soul at a time. A priest in Boston summarized it perfectly. It's like we stopped performing the Mass and simply began to offer it. Pope Leo XIV, a figure of quiet strength, chose silence even when surrounded by bishops in a private meeting. When pressed about the events that unfolded at the altar, his response was brief yet profound. The Church remembered who she is. He went on to speak about the Custodes Alaris. Though they never received formal acknowledgement, they became the driving force behind a powerful movement, distinguished not by flashy campaigns or public demonstrations, but by their unwavering devotion. These were the bishops, janitors, sacristans, monks, and seminarians who didn't need to distribute flyers or establish programs. Their influence grew simply through their act of kneeling, inspiring those around them to follow suit. It's remarkable when you think about it. In the final journal entry on Pope Leo's desk from that tumultuous week, just a single paragraph captured his thoughts. There are no saints who did not kneel, and there is no future for the Church that forgets the altar. And then, as if to punctuate his point, he noted that the altar had been set ablaze once more. But it's crucial to understand that we remembered not because of our own goodness. It was because of his mercy. That ethereal flame which had once graced the gardens never returned. Why? Because what it left in its wake was something far more potent than fire, its reverence. At that moment, the Church, despite being weary, battered, and speared by ridicule, finally embraced the one act that heaven had eagerly anticipated for over a century. It knelt again.